A compelling detective story, a cloak and dagger action, and a romantic drama, all these stories were taken from real life. The history of Kazakhstan is inseparable from the world history. Reflections on history, our version.
Lev Gumilev, in spite of everything. Eurasia is in the blood. 10 years of work. Historical geography. The origins of the future. The bookshelf is full of books of his mother's poems, a wooden knife for letters, photographs, a flip-flop calendar of his Moscow office in the capital of Kazakhstan, Astana, the Museum of Lev Gumilev. This table from his home office was given to us by his niece. Whenever he left the house, his home or office, he would leave a note in the drawer of the table. Chief, while looking, do not steal any books, put them back in their place. Thus he understood that when he left, all his records were checked. I spent 14 years in penal servitude, so I'm not an office scientist, but a convicted scientist. Some scientists say that they work like convicts. I'm sorry, I have to disagree. This is not hard labor, but free labor. They came home, drank tea, went for a walk, and I was behind barbed wire, from the memoirs of Lev Gumilev. The founder of the theory of passion and one of the founders of the idea of Eurasianism, a historian, a geographer, a writer, a poet, the famous son of famous parents, Lev Gumilev, in spite of everything. He was absolutely fearless. He's been through such horrible situations, you know. They were taking him to be shot. There was a message that was incredibly powerful, strong, which, after all, allowed him to not only create these works, but also to make them recognizable by the world community. He really illuminated the role of the Turks in the history of Eurasia. Chapter 1. Eurasia is in the blood. The only photo of the whole family, Anna Akhmatova, Nikolai Gumilev, and a little boy with a checkered scarf round his neck. The little lion cub, as his parents' friends called him. After the birth of Lev Gumilev, prophetic words were written by Marina Tsvetaeva, which foreshadowed his fate. A red lion with green eyes, a terrible legacy is waiting for you. When the First World War began, he was only 2 years old. His father volunteered for the front, after which he had to witness the Civil War and the divorce of his parents in 1918. I remember my childhood vaguely and unclearly, the scientist later admitted, but it all began in his childhood. His father has poems that are called Turkestan Generals. Under a slender scam through the peaceful brilliance of balls, it's so strange to see, near the walls, tall old generals. What's wrong with you? Their leg hurts so much. Gout? No, a wound, and in my heart again is a longing for the son of Turkestan. Lev listened with ecstasy to his poems, played cowboys and Indians and blind man's buff with his father. A passionate traveler, the poet Gumilev, before the war, visited Africa 3 times. He dreamed of equipping expeditions to Asia, the Far East, and was seriously interested in history. So it goes in the family legend. They called me Anna in honor of Anna Motovilova's grandmother. Her mother was the descendant of Genghis Khan, Tatar Princess Akhmatova, whose name made my literary name. My ancestor Khan Akhmat was killed by a bribed murderer in his tent at night, and that's how the Mongol reign ended in Russia, as Karamzin narrates. From the records of Anna Akhmatova. Scrape any Russian, and you'll find inside a Tatar. In fact, yes, we are so deeply tied by all sides of life that it's hard to finally find real, clean blood. His father was shot in 1921, and in 1929, after graduation, he moved in with his mother in Leningrad. To enter university, for the son of a counter-revolutionary and even of noble blood, was an unattainable dream. 5 years later, he was able to carry out successful scientific expeditions. But Lev did not stay long as a student. In 1935, he was arrested and released in a few months. and in 1938, a senior student of the university was convicted for 5 years. He asked to join the army, and, well, he was not released. When he was forced to leave to the front, he fought and wrote letters to the remaining prisoners, and he said that this was a sanatorium compared to what was going on in the camps. Virtue, with the exception of courage, I did not show, but nevertheless, I was filled for a release form with a criminal record. I am waiting for the result. I enjoyed the soldier's life in wartime, he writes to his friends after the capture of Berlin. The war was over. Our passion turned out to be higher than the Germans. He returned to Leningrad, defended his diploma in history, and he worked at the Institute of Oriental Studies. Although, as a fireman, short euphoria of the post-war years. In 1946, the organized baiting of Anna Akhmatova began, and 3 years later, Gumilev was arrested again. Chapter 2. 10 Years of Work. The investigation consisted of being asked the same question again and again. Say something anti-Soviet, something to blame you for. And I didn't know what I was to blame for. I couldn't recall any trouble. Nevertheless, I was sentenced to 10 years, and the prosecutor said, "You're dangerous because you're literate." From Lev Gumilev's autobiography. The portrait of Stalin, the disturbing music, the lanterns and the camp remind him, and the thoughts cast a darkness on the wide corridors, high ceilings and thick walls of the office of the chief. First of all, the Philistine, no matter how naive he was in politics, could not help noticing that the Soviet government was perhaps stronger than any bourgeois government. Joseph Stalin, Volume 6, page 238. The prisoner Gumilev, according to documents, was sent to the Epilogue branch, imprisoned for political reasons, to the special camp number 8, or sand camp. 1950. Most of the convicts were captured. For the 58th article, they worked in mines and construction sites in Karaganda. Gumilev himself was reluctant to share a lot about his stay in the places of detainment. The first time, he was imprisoned for his father and now for his mother. Karaganda, cold, hunger, Bandera, Vlasov, hard work. Fortunately, I got a job as a surveyor, then a stoker, then rewrote something. My Persian friend Rahim, who fled from the Shah. I'm learning Persian. I read lectures on history in the barracks. From the diary of Lev Gumilev. Persian was familiar to him from before. While still a student, Gumilev spent almost a year in Tajikistan and worked at a malarial station. The Tatar language he learned in the Crimean expedition. Other Turkic languages turned out to be more complicated, but he was quite good in conversational. With Eastern people, in particular with Uzbeks and Kazakhs, it was very easy to communicate. One has to be only honest with them. If you're honest with them, then you get a good response. Every free minute, due to his health, he had a lot of minutes to spend. He dedicated to science. Hunu is my vitamin, my joy, he wrote to his friends. After Stalin's death, when the atmosphere in the country got easier, he turned to his boss and said, "Can I write? What do you want to write about? Here is the Hunu or something there." After talking with the authorities, he returned and said, "You can write about the Huns, but other topics, not." All ideas carefully stored in his memory was simply impossible to transfer to paper because of the lack of paper. Sacking, packing from parcels, he used anything. Convicts brought him bags. At the same time, paper bags of cement were multi-layered. The outer layer was usually not used, but the internal ones, cleaned of dirt, were quite suitable. He cut them into pages even smaller than this, like a small notepad, and put them into a binder, writing only on one side. But this was later. In the Omsk region in 1951, Gumilev was transferred to Kamyshlag. After receiving a disability, he settled into the library, and the steppe empire began to revive, not only in his imagination. I finally restored my abilities after heart disease, and now the time and pace of the Hun The Uyghurs and the Kara-Kapchaks from the outlines of the shadows are gradually being transformed into real figures. I look at them almost like my own children. I take them out of oblivion. It's a real joy. From the letters of Lev Gumilev. He said the idea of passion came to him immediately. It's strange, but I came up with this theory when I returned from the Belomor Canal, and in prison, in Kresti, I expected to be shot, but at this time, instead of me, they beat Yozhov. And I was lying in prison under the bench, and I was still thinking about history. He saw it at once in its entirety, and he never even cried, but he cracked his head against the bunk. His theory of passion and ethnogenesis, in which everything intertwined, history, geography, biology, and genetics, his thoughts and ideas were too grand to be understood by his contemporaries. Chapter 3. Historical Geography. Precious records were managed to be passed to his friends, 30 self-made exercise books. But they did not let go of the fate of the book, and in 1954 he made a testament to the name of the investigator. I wrote the history of the Huns for my own pleasure and consolation of my soul. It's written in the same way as books are written for the Stalin Prize, only more alive and I hope more talented. Therefore, in the case of my death, I ask you not to destroy the manuscript, but to hand it over to the manuscript department of the Institute. When editing, the book can be printed, my authorship can be omitted. I love our science more than my own vanity. From the will of Lev Gumilev. After Stalin's death, he stayed as a convict for a few more years. He was only released in May 1956, and before that, a lot of other people were released almost immediately after Stalin's death. Then came Khrushchev's thaw, freedom, and again he was in Leningrad. Back relations with his mother were spoiled. Why? The researchers are still trying to find out. There's still no work, but a lot of plans. Artamonov was then director of the Hermitage, who knew him as a very talented student, and he took him to the Hermitage as Lev laughed at the rate of pregnancy and sickness. From the camp notes, he compiled a book, The History of the Han People. It was published in Vostok-Zat in 1960. The remainder served as material for several articles. They were also published. At the same time, a doctoral thesis on ancient Turkish was underway. He was received with great triumph. After that, I was invited to the university, and since I was interested in historical geography, I was invited to the geography department. It was the best period of my life. I was just happy that I could go to work and I could give lectures. Lev Gumilev, autobiography. In the last courses, I began to attend Gumilev's lectures, and I stuck to them. I loved the way he spoke. He was very interesting. So he said, "Yesterday morning I woke up and decided to count how many letters I speak correctly. 6. A hard sign and a soft sign." With his beloved wife, the artist Natalia Simonovskaya, whom he had met shortly after his release, he had his own place and work. In one of his last interviews in 1991, Gumilev regretfully says that he is the last Eurasian. Why? Because this is the period when Soviet Union disintegrated. Eurasianism was still forbidden.
Советский Союз распался, евразийство еще запрещено.
Vasilyevsky Island, the Institute of the Earth Sciences, the same geography department of the first Russian university, St. Petersburg. An inconspicuous door, closed. This was his last place of work. Epilogue, the origins of the future. The typewriter stopped at the edge of the table. It won't capture either a sudden illumination nor years of nurturing ideas. There are just a few of them, framed in hard bindings, ideas of Eurasianism through the depths of the centuries. This philosophical tradition, continued by Lev Gumilev, begins to revive finally in our time, in particular in the works of President Nursultan Nazarbayev, who revived this concept. I would say, even popularized it. Eurasianism is the idea of the 21st century. It's the idea of the future. This is a diamond. in the crown of integration, which today is required by globalization. From the speech of the President of the Republic of Kazakhstan, Nursultan Nazarbayev.